Once again, Liberty Bleeds Silver suggested a new type of video challenge, that is silver items or bullion items that have scales on them. I think he indicated that he'd seen lots of them recently and they had just been somewhere fresh in his mind, so he did a short video about his items from his stack that have scales on them, balance scales on them. And then I caught Stack Attack Wager's response to it too, and I thought, I'm in the middle of writing another video and I need a break from doing that. So I figured I would just give it a shot and go over some of my silver bullion items that have scales on them. Also, if you are new to the channel, my name is DubC. I want to thank you for being here. Hopefully you will like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you become part of this community. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you guys. As always, this will just be a little short video talking about some of the things. Some of them you've probably seen before, some of them maybe not quite so much in depth, but the idea is bullion products that have scales on them. This is actually something you would expect to see pretty commonly, right? A scale seems like it's a very logical thing to have on bullion, but I have to admit, I racked my brain trying to come up with examples. I know that I have some gold examples that have passed through my hands. I don't have them anymore, so I can't really talk about those. Obviously, the first one that came to my mind, if you have watched my channel before, especially if you've watched the Stacking Mexican Silver videos, a scale is something that is often seen on Mexican coinage of the 19th century, but also on what would later become Mexican silver bullion. So that's going to be the lion's share of what we're going to talk about. And I've also got some circulating pieces from Mexico from the middle of that period of time, 1870s or so. And then I've got some silver rounds that were made in the 1970s in America, made out of 999 silver. So we're going to talk about all of those and a couple of little extra surprises along the way. I'll try to make this one brief. I know my videos tend to run a little bit long. So we're going to start with the onzas, the Mexican onzas. I've talked about them a lot. They are one of my favorite bullion vehicles because they are so big. These are examples of these pieces, and I'll bring one in so you can see it. This is the later series. So Mexico actually released these originally in the 1940s, and it was a one-year type. I've got an example, and I'll do a little bit of comparison here in a second, but this is one that was from the 1980s, 1978, 1979, 1980, and it was called an onza. Now, this is 1 full troy ounce of silver, but it's in the form of a 92.5% pure silver coin, and you can see that where it says right here, lay, by law, legally, 0.925. But then it gives the weights in grams, and it also says 1 ounce of troy of pure silver. So even though it is 92.5% sterling silver, it's actually heavier than an ounce to account for the added alloy. In this case, I believe that's copper. But look how big this is compared to an American silver dollar. So this is an American Morgan dollar, and we're going to see if we can just completely block it out. Oh yeah, there is tons of space left over. Look at this. So if you're more used to a Morgan dollar, you're seeing it compared to one of these onzas. You get the idea of just how big these things are. They're also fatter. This is a great big coin. We'll talk about the Morgans again in just a little bit. That's a coin press on the front. I suppose it's kind of difficult to tell. These were never monetized, so these are not technically a coin. They were never meant to be spent. But which one's the front, which one's the back? I kind of think that this one's probably the front or the obverse, and then this is probably the back of the coin. I've talked about these a little bit on several different occasions. You've got a complete roll of them here. You've got some individual pieces that I submitted to NGC not too long ago, and I said I would compare it with one of the original pieces. This is one of the original coins that came out in 1949. And very similar, right? They look very, very similar. The font, the style of writing, slightly different. You can see the date here, 1949, off to the side. But when you turn it over, there's just a little bit more information on the 1949 version versus this one from 1980. See if you can pick out those differences. I like how on the 1949 version, directly beneath the scale, there's that scale, it says lay 925, 0.925 in much bigger words and letters than you can see numbers there off to the upper left on the more modern version of it. Again, a one-year type, 1949, and then Mexico brought it back in 1978, 1979, and 1980. So those are some beautiful coins. Here's an example that was graded MS66 by NGC, just so you can see what one looks like in this degree of preservation. There aren't that many of them that have been graded, 67, 68, 69, so this is a pretty high graded piece, and those cartwheel beams coming out of that coin press just look like lightning beams, don't they? And here's the back with a little bit of pretty rainbow toning on it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to submit this one, but you can see that balance scale there. A couple of different varieties for this series where that bottom pan of the balance scale either points to the U, as you see here, or points between the U and the N. It's kind of fun to see a style of a type of coin, a variety of coin that you can make out the difference with a naked eye. That's one of the reasons why I like those coins so much. I've got tons of these. If you're going to pick these up, my advice has always been to look for uncirculated versions of these. These weren't a coin, right? They were never meant to be circulated. Consequently, they really shouldn't be. And if you find an example that's been pretty beat up, I think I would probably let it go. I'd rather have something that's got that brilliant cartwheel luster to it. Next on the list, we're going to go a little bit further back in time. Emperor Maximilian, kind of the last king of Mexico, was cousin, brother of Archduke Ferdinand, I believe, and he was instated as the king of Mexico in the 1860s. And the people that put him in power thought that he was going to be a really conservative, kind of a typical monarch king, and he wound up being pretty liberal with his ideology. And America never really recognized him. They saw Benito Juarez, the person that was in charge of Mexico before him, as kind of the legitimate ruler of Mexico. And we didn't like the fact that France kind of backed up Maximilian. We had something called the Monroe Doctrine, right? European powers were not supposed to be meddling in the American continents. And France eventually got the message after the Civil War concluded. America started turning a little bit more of a sharper eye to Maximilian. France withdrew, and Maximilian was quickly deposed and executed. But while he was in power, he kind of came up with a new idea for coinage. And I've talked about these a little bit also in the Stacking Mexican Silver video series. Again, I'll put that down below. But one of the things that he did was to try to replace the 8 reales. That's the traditional piece of 8 Mexican and Spanish colonial silver coin, with a new silver coin called the peso. Peso meaning just kind of weight in Spanish. And this particular coin got to be known as the balanza. Balanza, just the word for balance. In other words, the balance scale that you see here is what this coin takes its name from. So this became the coin that was made in Mexico in the late 1860s, mid 1860s to about mid 1870s. But they never really caught on. And I think one of the reasons is that this is a Mexican Republic 8 reale that came before. So you get the idea of what these used to look like. This one, 1878, they made these concurrently. So Mexico, especially the branch mints, continued to turn out the 8 reales. They didn't pay too much attention to the big government telling them to make pesos. But while they are the same weight, here's that problem again. The 8 reale a little bit thinner, and these were made primarily for, well, at least in part, for trade in the Orient. In China, Mexico was still doing a fair amount of trade. The Chinese merchants still wanted big silver coins, and they trusted the Mexican and the Spanish colonial pieces. That's what their entire economy had been based on for a while. So while Maximilian produced these balanzas, they were the same weight and same purity as the 8 reales, but he decided to make them smaller and thicker. And the result was that merchants in China and the rest of Asia didn't really like them. They saw that as being a smaller amount of silver, even though technically it's really probably not. So the balanzas kind of came and went pretty quickly. Here's an example of one compared to, again, a Morgan silver dollar, just to give you an idea. Very close to the same purity, very close to the same weight, just about the same size. So these are a little bit closer in size than that 8 reale that I showed earlier. But this balanza became kind of unloved. Nobody seemed to want it, and as soon as Maximilian was deposed and executed, they sputtered and started for a couple more years, but they really kind of retired that design. and stopped making those in about 1874, 1875, I believe, and the peso wouldn't become a Mexican coin again for another 25 or 30 years. Of course, now when we think of a Mexican currency, we think of the peso. So maybe Maximilian was onto something. This is a 25 centavo piece from that same series. Again, you can see the balance on it, the balanza. So those are a couple of more kind of classic pieces that have scales on them. And then here's some examples of some American silver rounds. These ones date to 1970 to 1974. International Trade Unit, a very common theme, the scale, a very common theme on silver rounds from this period of time. But you see that it says 1 silver and then the date down below, 1974. So this is a great example of one of those early 1970s rounds. And I did a video on the 50-year club of silver rounds, those rounds that are older than 50 years. I'll put a link down to that video below. You'll take a deeper dive into these rounds that I'm showing in particular, and quite a few more that did not have scales on them. Here's a Universaro, a very popular round from that period of time. You can still find these. I think the design was attractive enough that this was one of those pieces that instead of throwing them into the crucible and melting them down, people kind of kept hold of these, and you can still find these in pretty good quantities. The Universaro 1972, you see the date down below, and again, the balance scale. So kind of a cool piece. Beautiful luster on this as well. I love those cartwheel spokes coming out of it as well. A neat piece. I mentioned that I would have a few other kind of hints at some other things. And I am going to be doing, coincidentally, a video about balance scales coming up here pretty soon. And just to give you a really brief idea of what I'm talking about, I know some of you will recognize this box, but keep your eyes open for it. When this video premieres, I'll go ahead and put a link in this video, even though you're going to be watching this video probably well before that video comes out. And then finally, I wanted to talk about a couple of extra pieces. I've mentioned in several videos that I do collect American Indian, First Nations silver jewelry, but in addition to those pieces, I also collect some Mexican silver jewelry. I know we talked a lot about Mexico here. Isn't that interesting? That a lot of Mexican pieces have a scale on them. These are two scales on some enameled cufflinks. This is possibly a semi-precious stone, but I think it's more likely to be enamel. These are sterling silver made by a manufacturer in Guadalajara named RMS. We don't know a whole lot about RMS, but I've got a pretty deep collection of their pieces. And I love that logo. If you saw that down below, that silver mark there, I will be doing videos about silver jewelry from this period of time, the middle of the 20th century. But I thought these were kind of an interesting addition. Obviously Mexican, and obviously have scales on them too. Kind of neat pieces. I've got a lot of pieces by that jeweler RMS, and we'll talk about those in those future videos about collecting Mexican silver jewelry. So just a real brief rundown of some of my pieces that have scales on them too. I thought that was a really good idea. Liberty Bleeds, thank you for suggesting this, and for you folks who have made the videos to kind of show off your pieces with scales. I'd love to continue that. So if there are other YouTubers out there watching this video, go ahead and put together a short video showing some of your items with scales. I think it makes for a really interesting presentation. It's certainly an interesting theme. If this was one of those things that you wanted to collect, I know there are some people out there who collect bullion by theme, and I think that's a really neat idea. If you have any questions about any of the pieces that I've shown here today, by all means, leave a question down below. As I'm fond of saying, if you have questions, there's a good possibility somebody else has that same question. Let's see if we can answer that for everybody. If you've got ideas or suggestions for other videos or video series that you'd like to see me make, again, leave that comment down below. If you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and click on that subscription button. It doesn't cost anything, but it helps build the community, and that's always nice to see more and more people watching the videos that we produce. And as always, I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.